Yeah. Good morning. It's great to see you all here this morning, and I'm looking forward to a great day of presentations, of discussions, and of learning together. Just a few announcements for all of you this morning. The workshop sessions are all in this room this morning, and then this afternoon they will be in a variety of sessions that I'll review in just a second. This room will offer translation into Portuguese and Spanish, and from Portuguese and Spanish into English. So if you don't have your headset, I would suggest that you get one so that you're ready when and if it will be needed throughout the morning. So please go to the back and get your headsets ready so that you're fully equipped. This afternoon, the workshops are not noted in your program booklet. So you will either need to look at the signs that are here just outside of this room, as well as on the first floor where they're listed in terms of the locations. But just to run through them, the research session, Research Perspectives, will be in San Diego at 2 o'clock. Is Home Education a Human Right? Will be in California. Effective Policy Advocacy will be in New York. The Home Education and Society will be in Atlanta. So those will be the first sessions after lunch. It's my pleasure this morning to welcome our premier sponsor, Classical Conversations. They are a freedom level sponsor of this conference, and they also sponsored the first ever GHEC in 2012. We're delighted to have Leigh Bortins, who's the founder of Classical Conversations, and her son Robert, and 9 staff members attending the conference. And it's the Bortins support that really makes this conference the conference that it is, and we would not be here today without them. Leigh is a homeschool mom, and she speaks on a variety of topics that really talk about the excellence in learning. The number of people that are involved and supported in their educational journey by Classical Conversations is phenomenal. The outreach is global. Leigh, we're so glad that you're here with us, and we'd like to hear about the mission and the function of Classical Conversations. But first of all, we just want to say thank you for your support, for your sponsorship, and for your partnership in global home education. Leigh, welcome here.
Bom dia. Can you hear me from here? I'm short. If I do this, I can't do this. There. Can you hear me? Is it picking it up? Okay, I'll stand. How about if I go like this? Maybe that'll be better. All right. So normally I don't have a written speech, but when I was told it was to be translated, I thought that might help. And then when I heard I only had 10 to 20 minutes, is it working? Oh, I didn't see it move. Smart man, thank you. When I heard I only had 10 to 20 minutes to speak, I thought, well, I better write it down because I usually speak for 3 days straight. And so I'm not very good at short speeches. So, hello, bon dia. My name's Leigh Bortins. And first, I would like to thank the GHEC team. Let's give another round of applause to the board that we met last night. It's been really, really wonderful. It's very difficult work to put on these kind of events. And if you're at the workshop on conferences yesterday, you heard the extensive list the Apologia staff shared with us, and it's just a lot to do, and so I really do appreciate them. I also appreciate the 9 staff members that Gerald referred to that are here. We're really fortunate that our team takes the time to travel and to support global home education also, so I thank all of you. And then I especially thank the Brazilians, those of you who say you're new to homeschooling and don't even do it or want to learn about it. This is a big chunk of time and some expenditure out of your pocket, so I just really appreciate that too. So we are behind GHEC for the long haul and hope to see you every few years whenever the the team and the Lord wills and the countries cooperate. So we're just excited about the whole adventure. So a little bit about my family. You'd think we wouldn't have to read that part. My husband Robert and I have been married since 1983, and we're on 33 years of marriage now. We have 4 sons. Our eldest, Robert, is here in the room possibly. Yeah, there he is back there. He is now the CEO of Classical Conversations, and he was homeschooled his entire life till he went on to Clemson University to get an engineering degree. We have another son, John, who owns his own construction company. Our son, William, is studying finance at the King's College. And our 4th son, David, is 17 and plays rugby. So I'm going to say a little bit more about that later, about the rugby side of things, because, well, let me ask you, raise your hands. Is being able to homeschool and play sports even a concern in Brazil? Nobody cares about that? In our country, it's a big concern. Homeschool, how will they play football, right? So then I won't address that. So great. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Classical Conversations. I've been homeschooling all those years, but so as I got to introduce my 2 new favorite members of our family. My son Robert married a lovely young woman named April, and she has given us our first grandchild, Lily. And so I'm very excited about that. And so whenever I found out she was pregnant 2 years ago, I purposed to take off from Classical Conversations. I am only taking like a 4-year sabbatical from it, because as soon as that little granddaughter is ready to read, write, and do arithmetic, I plan to jump right in with the homeschooling community that's supporting her as her grandmother. And I'm hoping for all the rest of those boys to find lovely women, maybe one from Brazil, and to give us a few dozen children, all right? Grandchildren. So that's my family. All have been homeschooled the whole way through. And they each have gone off to college at different ages for different reasons to study different things. All right, so Classical Conversations, our tagline is Classical Christian Community. People join us for our community. They want support. Usually they join us and don't even know why they're joining us. They've just heard that it's a good program and their friends love it, and they know that homeschooling classically for the long haul is a difficult thing to do. It's unusual in our culture, and they would like some help. The students in our curricula and our programs aren't really our customers. That is not who we aim to support. We support the parents. For the parents to practice and work together in the classical model, it helps for them to bring their children along. And so once a week for about half the year, families meet together with trained tutors, and the parents themselves are those trained tutors. And then they work on a variety of rigorous classical subjects. So let me just give you some numbers, because I have to do this fairly briefly. We began this in 1997 with 11 children. My son Robert was about 12 when we did that. I was very interested in the classical model, and for the older age years, it's really important to have community to educate classically, because it's not that much fun to play all the parts of Shakespeare in a play by yourself. And it's not always that much fun to keep debating with your mother and father, because eventually they're going to say, well, we win. So it's really great to have a peer group that you can bounce ideas off and expand the rhetorical activities. So we invited some students into our home and their parents, and we worked together. And 2 years later, as we went through the high school years with Robert, and then my son John joined in, we had 300 people on the waiting list. So I looked at the mothers and fathers who had been helping me for the last 2 years, and I said, all right, we are all now going to be doing this. And as of this past fall, so it's almost 20 years, 19 years, we have almost 100,000 children from 40,000 families with 16,000 trained tutors in the United States. And you heard those numbers right if your translation's occurring. We have 100,000 students. But the thing that I'm most proud of is those of you that are in leadership know that usually about 10% of people involved in a program really put all the work into it, and the other 90% are participants. But if you look at our numbers, 40% of our adults, of our parents, are the ones that do the actual tutoring and training for our program. 40%. There's no organization in the whole United States or across the world that has that kind of committed leadership, that 40% would be in leadership. And then our retention rate is 70%. People are very loyal to what we were doing because we don't focus on the children. We partnership with the parents, and we meet their heart's desires and encourage and help one another at that level. Because if you're going to be homeschooling for a long time, the parents are the ones that need the community more than the children. So often when people ask that horrible question about socialization and their children, you know, my thought is, well, what about their parents? Right? The parents are the ones that also need to be loved on and supported. So that's part of our main mission is community. The children will come if the parents are there. Then the classical part of it. I could talk forever about what the classics are to us. We define it a little bit differently than most people. In our country, at least, the context for classical education tends to center around the subjects of Latin, logic, and literature. But that's not what classical education is at all. Classical education is the 7 liberal arts, and 3 that we focus on are grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. So that's like just those words require a whole nother lecture. But in general, if you just read anything from C.S. Lewis or Dorothy Sayers or Chesterton about what classical education is, they'll help you to define it properly. What I'd like to address, though, is a concern about the classics that I've heard from some folks in the audience, and I'd like to hear more from you in the next couple of days, and it's this. In the United States, in Western literature, so UK, English-speaking countries, we have so much children's classical literature also, which is this good now? It was really echoing. Which, to me, it's still doing it. And classical children's literature is an excellent gateway to the more difficult classics like the Aeneid or Aristotle or even the King James Bible. So if any of you in this room want to send me a list of Portuguese classics for children or Russian classics for children, if we could begin to help the international see what the classic literature is for children in their own languages, I think that's a service that Classical Conversations could help you with by putting a website together and starting these lists. I went online and I could find a few. One that delighted me was that Winnie the Pooh is translated into almost every language that there is. And that's such a great book. And I'm not talking about Disney's Winnie the Pooh. I'm talking about A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh. So I think we can help each other that way in understanding what the classics are, and then how to study them classically through grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. And that's part of why parents, I think, are committed and loyal to us is when we spend 3 days teaching on what just dialectic means. They see that we are invested in them, and then they become invested in us. So I invite you to look into what classical really means, because guess what? Everybody teaches classically. If you learn anything well, it's because that's what you were doing, was classical education. And I'll be happy to defend that when I have more time. How about at lunch? Okay, so I just mentioned lunch. Let me, before I go on, mention that if you're at all interested in helping Classical Conversations to become an actual program in your own country, Mary Alfs, stand up and wave, Mary. At 12:30 at lunch, she's going to sit at a table and she welcomes any of you to join her just so she can hear what your concerns are and see if there's any way to partner with you. Mary's job is actually to help with the growth that we've had across the whole globe, and she has a team of, I don't know how many even you have, dozens and dozens and dozens, about 400 people help her manage all these programs across the United States, and we're in 12 other countries. Okay, so how's my time? I'm not looking at you, Jared. Are we doing well? I got 10 minutes. Okay, I'll take a sip of water. So let me then spend a little bit of time on the third aspect of it. We are Christians. That is the guiding principle that I would say that we hope is the foundation of our lives is to be able to read Scripture, know God through creation, and listen to our consciences to know the difference between right and wrong. But if that's not what your foundation is, you may have another foundation that you are looking to. The one thing I would say that we have in common is that we are trying to educate our children with what Tolkien and Chesterton and MacDonald, if you know those British authors, called the moral imagination. That all of us are trying to figure out what's right and wrong, and even when we say, in one of my speeches earlier, I met a gentleman from Brazil who said there was no right or wrong, and there were no choices, that your environment determined everything. And isn't that interesting that he could make a judgment that there was no right or wrong? So whatever it is that is the foundation or the principles behind what you believe, in general, when you love your children, you want them to have a moral imagination. You want them to know more than just facts. You want them to know, what do you do with these facts, and how do they inspire you? C.S. Lewis said that teachers should not be cutting down jungles, which is what we tend to do, that we should be irrigating deserts. And a moral imagination helps us to do that, right? Because it's easy to cut down a jungle, just takes a chainsaw. It takes years of time and patience and hard work to irrigate a desert. And so the moral imagination of a parent is very, very important too, if they're going to continue for a long period of time to raise a child who is a thinker. So I do have some things I want to read to you. Let's see. All classicalists have believed that healthy doses of truth, goodness, and beauty are required to combat sloth, fraud, and libel. Right? Truth, good, and beauty are what inspire the moral imagination. So I can't find a university, or I shouldn't say university, I can find university. I can't find any elementary schools or high schools in our country that have some sort of curriculum that says, bring your children here and we'll teach them truth, goodness, and beauty. Most of them we'll teach them math or science or history or literature. But as a classicalist, I don't want them to just learn math. I want them to learn what is true and beautiful and good about math. I want them to learn what is true and good and beautiful about science or history, right? So the foundation, the coursework, the accreditation, the curriculum in our home school is not math, science, history. We study math, science, and history, and we study good science and good math and good history as a way to examine truth, goodness, and beauty. Does that make sense to you, the differences? So how do you develop a moral imagination? Well, as a homeschooling parent, I'm always trying to figure out from the beginning, what did I do wrong, and how can I do that over again and do it right? And so I've come to realize that maybe the most important thing you can teach your child is to clean their room. How does that help with their moral imagination? How does that help with truth, goodness, and beauty? Well, one, they learn that their parents want a sense of order in their household. Two, that how things look actually do matter, but superficially, right? Because if the room's always clean and they hate you, I don't know that that's so good. But what's the antidote to that is to clean the room with them till they know how to do it and it becomes a regular habit, right? So that's the beginning of their moral imagination being stimulated, because they know that somebody that loves them is going to work hard with them and have expectations. So does that sound hard? Doesn't pretty much every parent do that to some extent? So in my mind, parents naturally are looking for the best for their children, whether it's in academics or in philosophy or in habits or liturgy or theology or whatever it is that's important to you. But something happens when your children turn 4, 5, or 6, depending what country you're from, and all of a sudden, all that good natural things that you've been trying to do with them, you get nervous because some expert, some system, some rule maker has decided that your child needs to be in their program. So I want to encourage you to look at classical materials, to look at a community to support yourself, Because when that person comes to try to rob the moral imagination of your family, you're going to need the support of the great thinkers of the past and friends and loved ones around you to help battle as they try to rob your children. Our goal as homeschooling parents is to ensure that everyone in our family has what the Bible calls fat souls, that we are full of goodness, truth, and beauty. Thank you. Can I take questions or be done? I have time for 1 or 2 questions if you have any. Oh, show the video. Never mind, I have no time. Thank you so much.
When we started, you begin to think as your children are growing up a little bit more about what are they going to be doing when they turn 4 or 5, 6. And so we felt compelled to do something different. And we weren't exactly sure what that would entail, but then homeschooling came across our path. I don't think we understood all the ramifications, of course, of homeschooling our kids, but we knew that we needed an education better than our own. We knew that there were other priorities that we had for our children and education that were different from our own.
I come out of a public school background. My education was public school and not really, parent-centric. So which means I was listening to whatever teacher I had, and so you're kind of being shopped around from grade to grade until you have good teachers, you have bad teachers, and you don't necessarily know what that's going to look like at the end of it. Having looked back on that, I think, was I given the tools to get all the knowledge I needed?
Academically, what I want to protect my girls from is boredom and complacency. I want them to keep the light bulb burning. I want them to see that learning is exciting and that it's not something you do to check off a list or to close out the end of the year, but it's something that you do because you're alive and the world is an interesting place and there are a lot of things that you don't know yet that you want to know.
I think that there probably are a lot of homeschoolers who homeschool their children to protect them from some school of thought, some ideas, but as we educate our children, we're not trying to protect them from thoughts that a lot of people would consider threatening. We're trying to provide the appropriate context for engaging those ideas and evaluating those ideas on the basis of truth.
We don't want them just to go through the motions to, okay, school year's over, we're done learning. Academically, I think we set out to teach our kids to be lifelong learners, as we are. I mean, we have books all over our house. That's one of our favorite things to do.
The world that I would like to give to our children is a world where the classical educated students are in positions of leadership. They recognize the wisdom from past great leaders, whereas it is being ignored in public education and the secular world.
We want to teach our kids in a homeschooling environment that allows them to know, how to think instead of what to think. That puts them on a different level where they're not sheltered because they can pursue whatever they want to pursue. And they go out and they can find the answers. They go out and self-educate. It's encouraging for us to know that I can learn as much as I can, give those tools to him, and then he can go greater or further than I ever did.
I say sometimes, I homeschool my kids because they're rock stars. Only rock stars get homeschooled, and that's kind of the case in America. If you're a movie star, all those, or if you're a child actor or something like that, you get treated special and you get homeschooled, and nobody questions it because, well, you have to because that's how those kids are making a living or whatever. Well, my kids are rock stars too.
It is thrilling to look over this audience and see all of you. We've been planning for this for 4 years, and it's just so great to be here together and to see you here in Rio. It's my privilege to wait for the lights to come back on. I'm getting some signals that I have a hard time reading body language. Okay. This morning we're getting a lesson in flexibility. We'll reorder our agenda a little bit this morning to accommodate the schedules of the Congress people that we're bringing in by Skype. But before we move to that on the agenda, I would like to introduce a message from a very, very good friend, Michael Farris. Michael Farris is a constitutional attorney who has very successfully argued before the United States Supreme Court. Mike is a passionate defender of the freedom of education and human rights, certainly in the United States, but around the world. Mike Farris was awarded an LLM at the University of London in public law with merit. He's the chairman of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association in the United States, which is the world's largest association with over 85,000 home educating families. He's also the chancellor emeritus of Patrick Henry College in Virginia. He's a prolific author. He's been recognized with a number of awards, including the Salvatore Prize for American Citizenship. He and his wife, Vicki, are home educating parents of their children, and I know that Mike really wanted to be here today, but he's unable we was unable to be here in person, but we're privileged to have Mike give us his message in a presentation that he pre-recorded that we're going to play now.
Good morning, I'm Mike Farris. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you today in Rio de Janeiro. My wife's health and my schedule did not permit this, but I'm really glad to be able to address you nonetheless. I want to talk about the doctrine of the margin of appreciation, how it's been used to curtail the right of homeschooling, particularly in Europe. Germany has been permitted by the European Court of Human Rights to deny families the right to homeschool under the doctrine of the margin of appreciation. Sweden has also tacitly been afforded the same opportunity for a draconian treatment of that state's homeschooling families. This parental right, however, is protected by the specific language of Article 2 to the First Protocol of the European Covenant on Human Rights. Article 2 reads, "No person shall be denied the right to education in the exercise of any functions which it assumes in relation to education and teaching. The state shall respect the right of parents to ensure such education and teaching in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions." The Council of Europe describes the margin of appreciation as, quote, "the space for maneuver that Strasbourg organs are willing to grant national authorities in fulfilling their obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights." The Council of Europe further explains that the margin of appreciation gives the flexibility needed to avoid damaging confrontations between the court and the member states and enables the court to balance the sovereignty of member states with their obligations under the convention. However, the Council advises caution, and I'm quoting, "There must exist principled criteria for the application of the margin of appreciation doctrine." The Council outlines 5 criteria, and we will examine today the first 4. The first is effective protection. I'm quoting, "The first principle, the effective protection inherent in the text, holds that since the overriding function of the Convention is the effective protection of human rights, its provisions should not be interpreted restrictively in deference to national sovereignty." The second principle is subsidiarity and review. While the primary duty for compliance with each state's human rights obligations rests with that state, The European Court of Human Rights functions, and I quote, to ensure whether relevant authorities have remained within their limits. The third standard is permissible interference with convention rights. When rights are conditional in the text, then such rights may be limited under particular circumstances, provided that the rules for limitations meet certain criteria. There are three. First, the limitations must be set forth explicitly in domestic law. Second, the aims of such limitation must be legitimate. Third, the limitation must be necessary in a democratic society. Bans on homeschooling cannot meet these standards for many reasons, not the least of which is that tolerance, rather than coercive uniformity, is necessary for a democratic society to thrive. The fourth standard is proportionality. Even if all the other criteria are met, interference with the exercise of a human right must not be done in a manner that's disproportionate to the rights in question. For example, even if Sweden was permitted to stop a family from homeschooling, a conclusion I would strongly dispute, it violates any sense of proportionality to terminate the parental rights of such families. It should be self-evident that the doctrine of the margin of appreciation cannot be applied in a way to justify the denial of certain human rights. For example, no government could ever justify torture or deliberate acts of racial discrimination by using the doctrine of the margin of appreciation. This is because there is a hierarchy in human rights law, and certain rights are non-derogable. Under the ECHR, derogation of rights is permissible under the provision of Article 15. The Convention permits a nation to fail to guarantee the rights under the Articles, I'm quoting, in times of war or other emergencies threatening the life of the nation. However, not even under these egregious circumstances is a nation permitted to derogate its duties to refrain from honoring the right to life or the duty to refrain from torture or slavery. Importantly, Article 15 adds these words concerning the limitations of derogation measures. Derogation is not permitted if such actions are, and I'm quoting, inconsistent with its other obligations under international law. Thus, under the precise language of the ECHR, if derogation permitted by Article 15 is contrary to another obligation on the same subject, then derogation is not permitted. This language requires us to look at the other treaties which are binding on the state parties in question. We turn to the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The ICESCR's parental rights provision is found in Article 13, Section 3. And it says, the state parties to the present covenant undertake to have respect for the liberty of parents and, when applicable, legal guardians, to choose for their children schools other than those established by the public authorities, which conform to such minimal educational standards as may be laid down or approved by the state, and to ensure the religious and moral education of their children in conformity with their own convictions. Article 18, Section 4 of the ICCPR provides, the state parties to the present covenant undertake to have respect for the liberty of parents and, when applicable, legal guardians, to ensure the religious and moral education of their children in conformity with their own convictions. Very similar provisions. Now, here are the rules of derogation for the rights contained in the ICCPR. It's found in Article 4, Section 1. And it says, in times of public emergency which threatens the life of the nation and the existence of which is officially proclaimed, the state parties to the present covenant may take measures derogating from their obligations under the present covenant to the extent strictly required by the exigencies of the situation, provided that such measures are not inconsistent with their other obligations under international law and do not involve discrimination solely on the ground of race, color, language, sex, religion, or social origin. This is a very high standard. In order to derogate these protected rights, there must be a three-part showing. First, there must be a public emergency. Second, that emergency must be so grave that it threatens the life of the nation. And third, this emergency must be publicly declared. And then, even when the derogation is permitted, it must be limited, a derogation, following these three additional rules. The derogation must be limited to the extent strictly required by the exigencies of the situation. Second, the derogation cannot be inconsistent with other obligations under international law. And three, there cannot be any discrimination based on race, color, sex, language, religion, or social origin. However, even these very constrained forms of derogation have an additional limitation found in Article 4, Section 2. This section absolutely prohibits the derogation of certain rights, even when the life of the nation is threatened by an emergency that's been publicly declared. Rights that are listed in Article 4, Section 2 are considered always non-derogable, rights that can never be violated by a state, no matter how urgently necessary the government believes it is to do so. There are 7 articles contained in the ICCPR which contain these non-derogable rights, rights that can never be violated. These include Article 6's protection of the right to life, Article 7's ban on torture and cruel punishments, Article 8's prohibition against slavery, Article 11's prohibition on using jail time to collect contractual debts, Article 15's ban on ex post facto definition of crimes, and Article 16's rule requiring the law to always respect the personhood of every individual. Human rights lawyers recognize that the right to life, the prohibition of torture and slavery, and the others listed to be at the very pinnacle of the human rights protections. Any state that violates these rights, even in times of dire national emergencies, are considered to be rogue states outside the bounds of civilized society. But there's one additional article contained in the list of non-derogable rights in Article 4, Section 2. It is Article 18. Article 18 can also never be derogated, and that contains broad protection of religious freedom for all persons. Religious liberty is also a non-derogable right. However, Article 18.4 is the one that is of special interest to us today, and it is also a non-derogable right. That section protects the rights of parents to choose education for their children that conforms to their own moral and religious convictions. Thus, under the unmistakably clear language of the ICCPR, the rights of parents to have an education that is consistent with the parents' religious and moral beliefs and convictions is absolutely beyond the power of a state to derogate those rights. Under the binding language of Article 15 of the ECHR, member states are not free to act in derogation of a protected right under that convention if to do so would violate its obligations under any other rule of international law. The ICCPR contains a rule that prohibits any state from acting in derogation of the right of parents to choose an education for their child in conformity to the parent's own religious and moral beliefs. Just as the margin of appreciation can never be used to justify torture, so too the margin of appreciation cannot be used to ban a form of education that a parent seeks for their child pursuant to that parent's moral or religious beliefs. It's important to note that the reason that Germany and Sweden ban home education is because of the fear of the development of parallel societies within their nations. Other nations call parallel societies pluralism. Some call it tolerance. In Germany and Sweden, it's called the fear of parallel societies. That is, people who believe and think differently than the views approved by the government. If the situation involved reasonable educational standards of academic assessment or the attainment of basic skills, then the language of the ICE-SCR gives us the relevant direction. It permits laws to ensure that parentally chosen education shall conform to such minimal educational standards as may be laid down or approved. This is the kind of law that regulates homeschooling in the United States. Many of our states have certain forms of minimal educational standards to which homeschoolers must demonstrate attainment. But such laws are a far cry from a total ban on a form of education that millions of parents around the world pursue for their children as a matter of either moral or religious commitment. By the way, such parents never create what Germany actually fears in parallel societies. In sum, the doctrine of the margin of appreciation is utterly inconsistent with the status of parental educational rights in international law. This judicial doctrine functions as an additional excuse for the derogation of rights. It would be bad enough for a state to attempt or a court to justify the derogation of lower-level human rights in a manner inconsistent with the rules on derogation contained in Article 15 of the ECHR. But when Germany and Sweden and the European Court of Human Rights sanctioned the banning of home education to ensure cultural homogeneity, it violates a non-derogable principle of human rights law that stands on the same level as a prohibition against torture. Nations that violate this level of human rights are properly considered rogue states and not civilized nations. It's high time for this egregious practice of human rights violations to end. Thank you very much.
It's so good to have champions like Mike Farris who are calling on nations around the world through the conventions and the things that he talked about in his presentation. And that's what this conference is about that right that's fundamental. And we want to join together in calling on nations. Okay. What I'd like to ask is something monumental. I'd like to ask you to take your devices that are in your hands and in your pockets and turn off your Wi-Fi. Put it on airplane mode. We're not going to take off. But we are going to bring some people in by Skype, and we need your help. We need your bandwidth. So if you can turn your devices onto airplane mode, that simply frees up the bandwidth space. I know that some of you have noticed that the Wi-Fi sometimes is a bit challenged, and so if we can just get you to do that, that would be very helpful, and it will help us get a more consistent signal in the speaker that we're just working right now on bringing on. And so we'll just ask for your patience and your help in setting your devices to do that. While we're waiting for the technology to enable the connection, I just wanted to let everyone know that the 2 o'clock session this afternoon with Andre Stern, Home Education and Society, where Andre is not going to be here in person because of pregnancy challenges that his wife is facing in Europe. That talk will only be available in French with translation into Portuguese. So we apologize to our English-speaking friends, but Andre Stern's talk will be in French or Portuguese this afternoon. So if you just make a note of that and plan accordingly in your schedule. You may be able to find a friend to help you, but I'm not going to start telling jokes. It looks like we're working on it, and maybe we're making some progress. I found when I walked into the room and saw this up there, let your followers know. That means that you're leaders. So let your followers know that you're at GHEC 2016, because they can follow us as well. Don't do it now, though. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Restrain yourselves. If you'd like to stand and stretch, that's okay. Or sit and stretch. I know that some of you are suffering the effects of significant jet lag. Some of our friends from Australia and Taiwan and Japan, Philippines, traveled in excess of 25 to 30 hours to be here, and we really appreciate that, that investment to be here. And certainly I know that within Brazil, talking to various people that drove in excess of 1,000 kilometers to be here, so very significant. One minute. We're getting there. I would encourage you as you have opportunity in the meals and in the various gatherings throughout the next 2 days to take opportunities to sit with people that you don't normally sit with. There's opportunities to reach out and connect with people from around the world, and I know for me, I'm a creature of habit where I tend to say, okay, this is my chair, and I see there's people there that I know, and I'll go and visit with them because I've got some business or I've got something that I want to talk about. But I would encourage you to use the opportunity to go and reach out and make new connections, and purpose that each meal you try and sit with somebody different, and be able to build those connections together. And I'm looking forward to being able to meet and talk with many of you. My experience is I've had opportunities to travel and be at various homeschool gatherings. I found over and over and over again that as I've traveled, yes, we have differences, we have different foods, we have different cultures to some degree, but when we talk about what we're doing with our children, it's amazingly similar throughout the world. One more minute. While we're waiting, I would like to thank the sponsors that we have for this conference, and I don't think I have a list of them in my book here. Bev, can you give me the small book? This is my wife, Bev. You asked for feedback. So I'd like to thank the sponsors for the Global Home Education Conference. We heard from Classical Conversations. We have Ignition. I would like to introduce to you Professor Dorinha Seabra Hazinch. She's known as Professor Dorinha. She's the daughter of education and has a life connected to education. She's the head of the Education and Cultural Bureau here in Brazil for nearly 10 years, and she promoted an education and cultural revolution in the state. She was elected a federal deputy by the state of, and I probably don't say this right, Tocantins, and re-elected she was elected in 2010 and re-elected in 2014, and she served on the Culture and Education Committee, among others. She is a true friend of home education in Brazil, and I'd like to welcome her in bringing a message and greetings to this conference.
Meu bom dia de maneira especial. Eu gostaria de primeiro dizer que gostaria muito de estar com vocês nesse debate extremamente importante para nós aqui do Congresso Nacional. Infelizmente, em virtude da organização do próprio trabalho aqui da Câmara, eu não tive condição de participar, mas vou acompanhar e quero colher todos os resultados desse debate extremamente importante. Quero agradecer ao comitê organizador desse congresso global que trata da educação domiciliar, desejar aos nossos visitantes que sejam bem-vindos e dizer que esse debate no Brasil é ainda muito recente. Acho que a tarefa nossa, e em particular eu que sou ligada à área da educação, fui secretária de Estado, lidei com a educação formal na sua estrutura burocrática do Estado do Tocantins por quase 10 anos e fui presidente também do Conselho Nacional que reúne todos os secretários estaduais de educação. Lido diretamente com a área de educação, pertenço a várias comissões aqui no Congresso, mas atuo diretamente na Comissão de Educação. E é nessa comissão que eu tive a oportunidade de conhecer, de receber a relatoria desse projeto inicial do deputado Leigh Portela, que é um deputado muito atuante, na verdade ele atua em várias frentes, e é um deputado com grande respeito nessa casa, o que facilita também a discussão desse tema. A educação domiciliar, ainda dentro do espaço da própria comissão e ligando e trabalhando diretamente com o próprio Ministério da Educação e com as secretarias estaduais e municipais, ela com certeza ainda precisa ser melhor compreendida. Nós realizamos aqui, eu tomei a iniciativa de realizar uma audiência pública. O deputado Leigh Portela já havia realizado também debates e seminários, também em relação a esse tema, e nosso objetivo era poder, na verdade, provocar a discussão, quebrar preconceitos. Existe hoje, na verdade, ainda, pelo próprio desconhecimento, um preconceito, um receio muito grande das instituições e pessoas que representam estruturas burocráticas da educação brasileira. Eu digo os Conselho Nacional, conselhos estaduais e conselhos municipais. O próprio Ministério da Educação e, como eu disse, as estruturas, secretarias estaduais e municipais. A proposta é de alteração da Lei de Diretrizes e Bases. O Brasil tem uma legislação específica que regulamenta o sistema de educação. Nós temos os sistemas municipais, que têm na responsabilidade os prefeitos com seus secretários municipais. Há as secretarias estaduais, que cuidam da educação básica no âmbito do Estado, e o Ministério da Educação, que trata de políticas públicas de maneira global, sendo que as secretarias municipais têm como obrigação principal a oferta da educação infantil, das crianças de 0 até 5 anos de idade, entre creche e pré-escola. Também tem o ensino fundamental, do 1º ao 5º ano, e também do 6º ao 9º, sendo que do 6º ao 9º ainda existe um compartilhamento de responsabilidade com as redes estaduais, que atuam nessa modalidade do 6º ao 9º ano, e a responsabilidade exclusiva do ensino médio, que é o secundário brasileiro, o ensino médio. E a União, na verdade, trata de políticas públicas gerais, mas é importante lembrar que estados e municípios têm sua autonomia de organizar os seus sistemas, organizar suas escolas, definir se vão funcionar por série, por ciclo, como é que essa escola vai funcionar. E é nessa Lei de Diretrizes e Bases que tem a proposta do deputado Leigh Portela de permitir, de regulamentar a educação domiciliar. Hoje, a maioria dos pais e famílias brasileiras lidam com a justiça quando decidem escolher a educação domiciliar. E o primeiro preconceito que nós temos que enfrentar é que muitas vezes as pessoas pensam que o fato de uma família escolher a educação domiciliar, ela está se desobrigando de garantir a frequência na escola. E no Brasil, a permanência e a frequência das crianças na escola começa já na educação infantil, com uma obrigatoriedade a partir, principalmente a partir de 2016, a oferta da pré-escola passou a ser obrigatória, o ensino fundamental e o ensino médio. Então, como é que nós vamos garantir que essas crianças e jovens cujas famílias querem oferecer educação domiciliar, elas tenham a garantia do que está sendo ensinado, do direito da aprendizagem, que no Brasil é considerado um direito subjetivo, assim como o direito à vida. Perante a legislação brasileira, a frequência à escola, ela é considerada um direito subjetivo que ninguém pode abrir mão. E as famílias, inclusive, que não levam os seus filhos à escola, podem ser presas porque estão negando um direito como o direito à vida. Então, a mudança na legislação, ela tem esse objetivo de garantir para os pais que querem realizar a educação domiciliar que possam ter essa oferta. Logicamente, o Estado não pode se desobrigar dessas crianças e jovens, o Estado tem que acompanhar, justamente para garantir que o direito seja assegurado, as pessoas possam ter a sua opção de ensinar em casa, de garantir um processo pedagógico diferenciado, porque é o que eu acredito, a partir da minha busca em compreender a educação domiciliar, o que eu vi foram famílias extremamente dedicadas à educação dos seus filhos. Muitas vezes mais do que as famílias que colocam numa escola regular ou até em regime integral e que, a partir da frequência dos seus filhos à escola, elas se desobrigam, elas acham que elas não têm mais nada a fazer perante a educação dos seus filhos. E, na verdade, o que tenho observado a partir do estudo e quero tentar convencer os meus colegas deputados de que o envolvimento das famílias independe, primeiro, não são só os mais ricos que podem escolher, não são os mais informados ou instruídos ou com formação de mestrado, doutorado na educação. Na verdade, é um jeito diferente de educar, em que a criança e o jovem passa a ser gestor da sua aprendizagem. E é um processo permanente de conhecimento e de aprendizagem. E os pais não se desobrigam da educação dos seus filhos. Ao contrário, eles se envolvem de maneira muito direta, porque a responsabilidade com essa aprendizagem é deles, família. E nenhuma família vai querer negar o direito aos seus filhos de ter oportunidades de trabalho, de ter oportunidades de se transformarem como cidadãos pleno de direito. O meu projeto, na verdade, eu apresento um substitutivo procurando resguardar. Eu sei que nós talvez mais tarde possamos conseguir avançar mais do ponto de vista da legislação, mas a regulamentação, ela fica a critério, logicamente, os pais precisam decidir, e o sistema de ensino municipal e estadual precisa se organizar para garantir essa oferta. As crianças e jovens precisam estar matriculados numa escola. Essa escola, na verdade, é a escola que vai expedir a documentação e, teoricamente, é a responsável por essa parte burocrática que o sistema brasileiro exige. Essas crianças deverão se submeter, assim como qualquer aluno brasileiro tem os exames nacionais. Nós temos aqui um exame de alfabetização, que não tem nenhum caráter de dar nota ou punitivo, mas para avaliar as condições de alfabetização das crianças, porque nós temos uma legislação que diz que ao final de 3 anos de escolarização, ou seja, por volta dos 8 anos de idade, as crianças já devem estar plenamente alfabetizadas. Então, tem um exame que é feito. Tem os exames realizados ao final do 5º ano, do ensino fundamental, um ao final do 9º ano e ao final do ensino médio, o conhecido Enem, Exame Nacional do Ensino Médio, Então, nesse conjunto de exames, as crianças que fizerem opção pela educação domiciliar terão que fazê-lo. Até porque alguns desses exames, como é o caso do ensino médio, ele é condição e uma das portas de entrada para os jovens nas universidades. Então, é uma forma também de garantir direitos que são garantidos a todos os brasileiros. E é lógico que a escola e o sistema pode acompanhar e deve acompanhar, porque nós temos que lidar também, logicamente, com a proteção à criança, para garantir que essa criança, à luz que a família, cuja família escolheu a educação domiciliar, não terá o seu direito de formação e aprendizagem negado. Um outro ponto que nós temos que combater, porque na visão geral das pessoas, o fato da criança ou da família optar pela educação domiciliar impede a socialização, reduz a socialização. Esse é um argumento que comumente nós ouvimos de colegas deputados e de instituições que vieram aqui nas audiências públicas dizer, olha, nós somos contra porque a criança que ficar na sua casa, ela não vai ter oportunidade de socialização. Ora, nós sabemos que a socialização não é somente na escola. A escola é um dos espaços de socialização e, eventualmente, o sistema pode, inclusive, organizar momentos e eventos que as famílias possam levar os seus filhos a esse espaço formal da escola. Mas essas crianças, elas participam da vida em sociedade. Elas têm, junto com as suas famílias, outros momentos de contato com a sociedade. O fato de fazer opção da educação domiciliar não significa que elas agora não vão mais participar do mundo. Então, esse é um dos pontos que também nos cabe quebrar essa informação burocrática de que as crianças não vão socializar. Uma outra é essa da questão do currículo, né? O Brasil hoje discute uma base nacional, um currículo nacional obrigatório, que as crianças, quer seja do Rio de Janeiro, de São Paulo, do meu estado, Tocantins, do Acre, de qualquer lugar do Brasil, elas terão que aprender. Em torno de 60% de conteúdos obrigatórios. Obviamente, os pais que fizerem a opção, as famílias que escolherem a educação domiciliar, também terão que trabalhar esses conteúdos obrigatórios. Até porque os seus filhos serão avaliados em relação a essa questão dos conteúdos obrigatórios. Os 40%, cada sistema vai definir, cada escola, e é lógico, os pais já fazem isso. Nas audiências públicas, me chamou muita atenção a famílias inteiras, com crianças pequenininhas, que ficaram aqui por 4 horas dentro de uma sala formal, escutando de maneira obediente, ordeira, e lógico que isso faz parte do processo de educação. Existem algumas correntes no Brasil que acham que escola é só para ensinar o português e a matemática, a geografia, a história, os conteúdos formais. Na verdade, a escola também trata com valores, com caráter, com formação, com visão de mundo, com respeito ao próximo. São espaços que são construídos na relação professor-aluno. E uma das coisas também que nós devemos tomar cuidado é que muitos defensores da educação domiciliar, às vezes no seu desejo de fortalecer e dizer o quanto ela pode ser diferente, dizem, as escolas públicas são muito ruins, eu não quero colocar meu filho numa escola pública porque ele vai lá e ele vai aprender coisas erradas, ele não tem a escola não tem um padrão de educação que eu quero para os meus filhos. Isso pode ser verdade em algumas escolas, nós temos escolas públicas boas, temos escolas públicas ruins, assim como temos escolas privadas boas e ruins. O argumento central não pode ser esse, né? Porque, na verdade, quando a gente usa esse argumento, nós afastamos todos aqueles que são responsáveis pelo sistema público de serem parceiros nossos nesse desafio de permitir que a família faça essa escolha. Até porque na Constituição diz que a educação é dever da família, responsabilidade da família e do Estado. Não é o Estado primeiro, mas a família. E o fato da escolha, ela pode vir por uma família que queira que seus filhos tenham a oportunidade de ter outros conhecimentos, que seus filhos tenham um jeito pedagógico, ou seja, uma técnica, não é uma técnica, mas a pedagogia da educação domiciliar é uma pedagogia que eu entendo que ela é extremamente de responsabilização do educando, né? O aluno, a família, o estudante, ele é gestor do seu conhecimento e ele vai buscar instrumentos para esse conhecimento. A relatoria do projeto já foi entregue, né? Eu já estou aguardando as comissões. Elas devem ser instaladas brevemente. Nós estamos ainda sem funcionamento das comissões. O trabalho aqui na Câmara só tem algumas comissões funcionando. A Comissão de Educação ainda não retornou ao trabalho. Então, logo retorne, nós vamos pedir prioridade. Mas é muito importante que nós tenhamos o cuidado com quais os argumentos vamos usar, né? Como é que nós vamos fazer essa construção de que os deputados podem autorizar, porque o projeto é autorizativo, tem uma série de regras, nós vamos para o debate, pode ser que algum deputado apresente algum pedido de mudança, modificação na proposta, mas nossa tentativa é de convencer, e o maior desafio é convencer o próprio Ministério da Educação. Eu já falei bastante, eu quero me colocar à disposição, eles podem passar os contatos do meu gabinete, o relatório está disponível, o texto chamado substitutivo legal também pode ser compartilhado, e recebendo algum tipo de contribuição que nós possamos tentar construir para que o projeto seja aprovado, é muito importante. Eu sei que, às vezes, e eu já tive a oportunidade de discutir com especialistas da educação domiciliar, gostariam que o projeto pudesse ser mais liberal, pudesse ser mais aberto para as famílias. É importante vocês entenderem que nós estamos mudando uma cultura. As mudanças propostas, elas já serão de grande avanço. E é lógico que a experiência exitosa, a partir da permissão da lei, é que vai convencer outras pessoas que são reticentes, que têm receio, que têm medo de não funcionar, de que as crianças não têm o seu direito assegurado. A preocupação basicamente é essa, porque os sistemas também terão que se organizar, isso vai ter custo, e as escolas públicas brasileiras têm muita dificuldade, inclusive financeira ainda, e de estrutura, porque elas vão ter que se organizar para esse acompanhamento. Mais uma vez, eu gostaria de pedir desculpas, seria muito importante, porque eu teria a oportunidade da interação, das perguntas, das contribuições de vocês, e quero colocar esse canal aberto, porque aí vocês podem falar comigo, sugerir, mandar textos, tudo que pode ajudar nesse processo de convencimento. Então, eu desejo que esse momento de debate, de construção, de troca de experiências, possa ajudar, em especial, o Brasil, porque as experiências mundiais são bastante significativas. Então, ajudar o Brasil a se abrir para essa experiência que eu tenho certeza que será exitosa. Então, meu bom dia a cada um de vocês, e vamos vibrar, torcer, para que o Congresso entenda que é uma liberdade, que as famílias têm direito de realizar essa escolha, sem prejuízo do direito da criança e do jovem, o direito de aprendizagem e o direito à educação. Eu acredito nisso. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much for that message. We are now going to connect with another political leader here in Brazil, Lincoln Portela. Representative Lincoln Portela is from Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais, and I'm sure I have not said that right, my apologies. He's in his 5th term as a federal congressional representative in Brazil's Câmara dos Deputados, and he's also a television host, a radio personality, and a lecturer in the fields of family and psychology. He graduated with a theology degree in 1974, and he's also a Baptist minister. In the Chamber of Deputies, He served as the leader of the Republican Party, leading numerous coalitions and committees, and in 2011 he proposed a bill to positively impact the whole homeschool climate in Brazil. So Lincoln Portela. Again, he'll be coming in via technology. We're working on connecting him. While we're waiting, I would like to recognize the financial support and the support in so many ways of the sponsors of this conference. And we've heard from Classical Conversations, and we thank them. Also want to thank the Institute for Excellence in Writing. 5 minutes? Okay, so we got a little bit of time, and I'll talk very slowly. I'll pretend that I'm from the southern part of the United States, where they. But I don't have the right. I don't have an accent, by the way. So Institute for Excellence in Writing, Andrew Pudwa. Andrew is here. I saw him earlier. There he is back there. The Homeschool Foundation. I want to thank them. And Tracy Klicka is here representing the Homeschool Foundation. I don't see Tracy here right now, but she certainly is. The Canadian Centre for Home Education. Paul Farris is the president of the Canadian Centre for Home Education. ChristianBook.com, we thank them. The TMA Homeschool from the Philippines. Edric and Joy are here, but I don't see them in the room right now. There's Joy. Thank you. The Alliance Defending Freedom, and also, and I don't want to skip over them in any way, is the Homeschool Legal Defense Association in the United States. And we really appreciate the funds that are raised and contributed by each one of these sponsors. It's very significant. And the funds, make this conference possible, in helping pay for the costs of putting it on, the costs of bringing in some speakers, and the costs to help with just the practicalities of paying for the facility and feeding all of you. So it's much appreciated to all of the sponsors who contribute to the cause of bringing this conference to a reality. So the next person we're bringing on is not. Okay, so we're going to bring on Lincoln Portela momentarily. He's a very, he's like, I work for the government in Canada, and to try to get a politician to commit to a specific time is, you always have to sort of be flexible and ready to move with things. So what we're going to do is bring on Lincoln Portela, then we're going to take a break because we aren't the coffee refreshment breaks that you have that we're having here in Brazil, is this normal? Do you like, it's like hobbits, it's like second breakfast. Like when we have a break in Canada, it's like coffee and one cookie each. And if somebody, one of my friends, gets there before me, then it's no cookies for me. So I really appreciate the hospitality here. Not that I need it, I can go without it quite easily. But I do enjoy it. So I'm interested. I'd like to have a little bit of a contest. I'd like to see who spent the most number of hours on an airplane and whether they can stand up. Who spent more than 20 hours on an airplane? If you spent more than 20 hours on an airplane, if you could please stand up. So we've got, please stay standing. Leenderts, the folks from South Africa, Australia, Philippines, and Japan. Now, so if you spent more than 24 hours on an airplane, so we've still got Japan and Australia and the Philippines. 25 hours, more than 25 hours. So the winner of the contest, you get an extra cookie. Who spent the least? Well, who drove more than 1,000 kilometers to come to Rio de Janeiro, to this conference? And Ricardo at the back. So we got two families that drove more. It's more than 1,200 kilometers. Well, just how many kilometers did you folks drive? 1,400. And Ricardo? The same, 1,400? 1,200? Well, I just really appreciate the effort that you've made to come and be here. I come from a place, you get an extra cookie too. In Canada, we have fairly large distances as well, and we can certainly identify with traveling that far. That's just kind of like you drive that before coffee break, so not quite, but 1 minute, okay. We could start telling lawyer jokes. Do you know how many lawyer jokes there are? Apparently there's 2. Everything else is actually true. That's okay, Mike. I'll tell one though. It's because it's about Canada. Do you know how you know the temperature in Canada? When it's really, really cold in Canada, the lawyers have their hands in their own pockets. Sorry, Mike. He doesn't get it. Here we go.
Alexandre, já estou a postos aqui.
So I'd like to welcome Lincoln Portela to our Congress and to ask him to bring greetings and comments to the homeschool delegates here.
Você quer que eu fique mais aqui?
Centralizado aqui, não, só está aí. Isso, um pouco. Mais um pouco. Isso.
Aí.
Isso. Pode dar um ok.
Ok, não, estou tranquilo aqui. Eu estou te vendo bem. Ok. Não, ok. Já faço uma saudação? Ok. Doutor Alexandre, que bom nós estarmos juntos aqui e que bom estarmos falando nesta conferência que, claro, tem um impacto internacional. A minha saudação ao GHEC, presidente da NED, e a todos os senhores e senhoras que têm trabalhado com afinco e com dedicação em relação ao homeschooling, à educação domiciliar. Aqui na Câmara dos Deputados, da mesma forma, continuamos conversando, continuamos falando. Essa semana estive com a professora Dorinha, que se viu impossibilitada também de estar aí. Foi o mesmo caso da minha parte, pelo fato de estarmos num momento de crise aqui no Brasil, econômica e política, também a questão da janela partidária, porque me vi com mais liberdade, tanto eu quanto o deputado estadual Leigh Portela, de mudarmos de partido, fomos agora para o PRB, Partido Republicano Brasileiro, e, por certo, continuaremos o nosso trabalho ali. Eu bem sei que o Brasil precisa entender o que representam, de fato, as minorias, e aqueles pais, aquelas mães dedicadas que trabalham com a educação domiciliar são minorias e, lamentavelmente, por uma questão de discriminação, por uma questão de falta de conhecimento e de entendimento, eles ainda não entenderam que educação domiciliar é também uma questão de direitos humanos. Claro, os pais, segundo a Constituição brasileira, têm o direito de fazerem com que seus filhos possam receber uma educação de qualidade em casa. Eu gostaria até de não entrar na questão da educação que é oferecida ao Brasil, no sofrimento dos professores, na desqualificação, no sofrimento dos alunos, e a educação domiciliar, de qualidade, de ponta, pode oferecer condições muito melhores para os alunos brasileiros, condições pelo menos iguais ou melhor. E eu bem sei que bem melhores, na minha avaliação, são as condições da educação domiciliar. Eu estou junto aqui, estou pronto, lamento profundamente não estar aí, pelo fato de ser um parlamentar que tenho 100% de presença na casa, nem no casamento do meu filho na Itália eu pude ir, e também passarei por uma cirurgia no próximo sábado. Amanhã já entro como preparo para esse procedimento, eu estou tirando a safena da perna direita, mas graças a Deus, as outras veias estão bem para eu poder pensar o sangue circular e pensar muito educação domiciliar para o Brasil. Espero também que o Supremo Tribunal Federal haja nesse sentido, faça a devida interpretação, dando liberdade a pais, dando liberdade às mães, e eu separo, às vezes, pelo fato de termos casais que já passaram por um processo de separação, mas tanto o pai quanto a mãe estão desejosos de que os filhos tenham uma condição melhor. O aprendizado da educação domiciliar é o da melhor qualidade possível, ele interage bem o aluno com a sociedade, não existe isto de isolamento, essa questão de socialização. A socialização começa em casa, vai para a escola e vai para outros lugares. Parabéns a todos vocês que estão fazendo esse trabalho. Um grande abraço. Agora voltou, estou te vendo melhor. Ok, obrigado.
For the willingness to participate in this way. I think we've seen and heard two very encouraging messages from politicians here in Brazil that show the support and the challenges. And we certainly want to stand with our brothers and sisters here in Brazil in the challenges that they're facing and others around the world. What we'd like to do right now is take a break. The refreshments are directly outside of the room, so please go and have your more than one cookie. And we will reconvene back in this room at 11 a.m., so 1/2 hour from now.